Squadrons. Halt!
Obelisk party! Outwards! Turn!
Good afternoon. My name's Michael Newby. I'm from the Harrogate International Partnerships, and it's on behalf of the Harrogate International Partnerships and our hosts, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, that we welcome each and every one of you to this ANZAC ceremony. We are all gathered here today to remember the 120 airmen from New Zealand and Australia who gave their young lives in the service of their country and the Commonwealth during the Second World War. As we stand here on what is now ANZAC Day, April the 5th, on the other side of the world, in Australia and New Zealand, hundreds of thousands of people are gathering in preparation for the traditional 5 a.m. dawn parades that will soon take place. There will be music, dedications, remembrances, and a sharing of love and peace. In this very first ANZAC ceremony in Harrogate, we give thanks for the ultimate sacrifice made by these young men who now lie together forever in peace and comradeship. Together we also remember the sacrifice made by parents whose sons and daughters were destined never to return to their homeland and the love of their families on the other side of the world. Today, as we remember their names and honour their sacrifice, we dedicate this ceremony to building a world where there is justice and peace for all people in every corner of our world. And now will you join us in the hymn which we dedicate to the Australian New Zealand airmen and women who are buried here in Stonefall and in all corners of the Commonwealth. And the words should be on your programmes. And may I now welcome Commander Matthew Radford of the Royal Australian Navy for his address.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. This ceremony commemorates the 107th year anniversary of the landing of Australian and New Zealand Army Corps on the Gallipoli Peninsula. ANZAC Day is the National Day of Remembrance in Australia and New Zealand. Today we acknowledge the courage and sacrifice of our current and former servicemen and women who have served and died in all conflicts, and our allies who have served alongside them. Good afternoon. I would like to acknowledge His Worship Mayor Trevor Chapman, Local Member for Parliament Mr Andrew Jones, Sub-Lieutenant Andrew Chisholm, Royal New Zealand Navy, Squadron Leader Jeff Dixon, Royal Air Force, Sergeant David Lund, North Yorkshire Constabulary, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Mulligan, US Air Force, Kate Spencer on behalf of the New Zealand High Commission, Mike Comerford, the Royal British Legion, and Dennis Richard, Chairman of the Harrogate International Partnerships. ANZAC Day is traditionally focused on land forces. Today, however, I'd like to speak about the first Australian warship lost in the Great War. On this day, 107 years ago, the silent ANZAC, Australian submarine AE2, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Henry Stoker, Royal Navy, first attempted to enter the Dardanelles. He was forced to turn back due to a jammed hydroplane. On the 25th of April 1915, Stoker successfully took AE2 through the 47-mile strait into the Sea of Marmara. He had orders to generally run amok in the Narrows as a diversionary action to cover the landings at the Gallipoli Peninsula, what was later to be known as Anzac Cove. After harassing the Turkish forces for a week, Stoker was forced to abandon and scuttle AE2 and spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. I would also like to acknowledge the war service of my own grandfather, Warrant Officer John Howe, who spent 3 years in the United Kingdom during World War II as part of the Royal Australian Air Force No. 10 Squadron. The squadron was tasked with maritime patrol and sunk 6 submarines during the war. My grandfather survived the war, returned to Australia to father 6 children. The close bonds between our countries that has been forged in war is made more special by the enduring respect and care taken by the local community in caring for the war graves that we are surrounded by today. In closing, I would like to draw our thoughts on the impacts of war, especially on what is happening to the people of the Ukraine today. Thank you.
As part of Harrogate International Partnership's 69-year twinning with Wellington, New Zealand, we are delighted that Harrogate Grammar School have now entered into a similar twinning with Scots College in Wellington. To celebrate this college allegiance and a further extension of Harrogate International Partnership's relationship with Wellington, I would like to welcome Harrogate Grammar School student Lucy Hargreaves to lead us in this most well-known of Australian songs. And I have to add that we're actually omitting verse 2 on your orders of service. So Lucy Hargreaves.
Once a jolly flagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree, and he sang as he watched and waited till his belly bore. Oh, come a waltzing Matilda with me, waltzing Matilda. jump back in his tucker-back. You will come a waltzing Matilda with me. Down came the squatter, mounted on his thoroughbred. Up came the troopers, 1, 2, 3. Who's a strolling jump back? You've got in your tucker-back. You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. You come a waltzing Matilda with me. Who's that jolly jump back you've got in your tucker-back? You'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. Up cut the swagging and jumped into the billabong. You'll never catch me alive, said he, and his ghost may be heard if you pass by that billabong. Will come a waltzing Matilda with me. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. Will come a waltzing Matilda with me, and his ghost may be heard if you pass by that billabong. Will come a waltzing Matilda with me.
Well done.
May I now welcome Sub-Lieutenant Andrew Chisholm of the Royal New Zealand Navy for his address.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I would like to begin by acknowledging Kate Spencer, without whom we would not be here at this inaugural event. Sirs, madams, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honour and a privilege to serve and represent New Zealand here in Harrogate today as we pay our respects to those ANZACs who have fought and given their lives, many of them travelling far from home to do so. At this site rests 23 New Zealand servicemen of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, 4 of which are from the city of Wellington, twinned with Harrogate. And it is right that we should meet here to remember them and their sacrifice for New Zealand. On this special day each year, New Zealanders come together at home and overseas to honour those who have and who are serving in our armed forces. We especially remember those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for New Zealand. In recent weeks, we in our peaceful country have had the brutal reality of war brought home to us by the shocking images of death and destruction in Ukraine. This ANZAC Day, we should not shy away from recognising that there are those in the world who are prepared to use violence in its most extreme forms to achieve their ends. Some ANZAC Days have occurred at very difficult times in our country's history. 80 years ago, on ANZAC Day 1942, we and our allies were engaged in a monumental struggle against enemies whose conduct and beliefs were utterly abhorrent to what we stand for. "1942 is widely regarded as the hardest year in the Second World War. Our country suffered heavy losses in North Africa, over the air in Europe and elsewhere. In March, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft flew over Auckland and Wellington. Australia had suffered its first air raids. Fears of a Japanese invasion prompted a mobilisation unprecedented in the history of New Zealand. This was reflected at ANZAC Day services, which were attended by mainly record numbers of young uniformed personnel. These mainly young servicemen and women stood beside veterans of the First World War, who knew firsthand the terrible toll that war takes. The grief brought by war to New Zealand was evident in newspapers on the eve of ANZAC Day. Not only did they contain new casualty lists from around the world, but also many in memoriam notices placed by grieving families and friends. Most related to soldiers killed in Greece in the year before, such as Private Nelson Bell, who had been killed in action on the 27th of April 1941. The notice read in part, "Not just today, but every day. In silence, we remember." There were also notices marking the deaths of soldiers killed in the bitter fighting in April 1918. These notices speak to just how widespread and long-lasting the grief was that had been brought to New Zealand by wars during the 20th century. Let us hope that we are fortunate enough to be spared such ordeals in this century. Many of those who were gathered at these services were worn out by war and worried about loved ones serving overseas. What was powerfully evident, however, was that the people of New Zealand were utterly committed to doing all that was needed to defend their country and all that we hold dear. They also look forward to the better times when they and their friends and family would be able to go about their lives in peace. Each ANZAC Day, we renew our commitment to never forgetting all of those who have served and who are serving in our armed forces and have done armed forces in New Zealand. We should, on this ANZAC Day, also especially remember the people of Ukraine, who are enduring great suffering and facing terrible danger in order to defend their free land. E kore rato, e koma tuitia. Pene ia tātou, ko mahu e nei. E kore, hoki rato, e nui kore. A hakoa, pahiha, ina ahuatanga o te wā. I te hekenga atu o te rā. Tai noa ki te arangamai I te ata. Tai noa ki te arangamai I te ata. Ka momahara tonu tātou ki a rātou. Ka mahara tonu tātou ki a rātou. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you.
And we stay with New Zealand as I welcome back Lucy Hargreaves to sing Per Karakareana.
O Karakareana, ngā waio waio pū, I te ato koe ine, marino ana e hine, o ki maina, kamatea, I te aroa tuhi tuhi takorita, tuko atu takoringi, kia kiti toiwi, raru raru ana e hine, o ki mai.
I now invite Gareth Gibbs to lead us in the remembrance element of today's ceremony.
Ray, run.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
Stand-ups. Ace.
Members of the civil and military communities will now lay wreaths. His Worship, the Mayor Trevor Chapman. Member of Parliament for Harrogate and Knaresborough, Andrew Jones. Commander Matthew Radford, Royal Australian Navy. Sub-Lieutenant Andrew Chisholm, Royal New Zealand Navy. Squadron Leader Jeff Dixon, Royal Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Mulligan, United States Air Force. Sergeant David Lund, North Yorkshire Constabulary. Kate Spencer, on behalf of the New Zealand High Commission. Mike Comerford, the Royal British Legion. Squadron Leader retired, Phil Crebbins, Royal Air Force Association. Dennis Richards, Chairman of Harrogate International Partnerships. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today.
And our reading will be given by Harrogate Grammar School student Sam Featherston.
Down the close, darkening lanes they sang their way to the siding shed, and lined the train with faces grimly gay. Their breasts were struck all white with wreath and spray, as men's are, dead. Dull porters watched them, and a casual tramp stood staring hard, sorry to miss them from the upland camp. Then, unmoved, signals nodded, and a lamp winked to the guard. So secretly, like wrongs hushed up, they went. They were not ours. We never heard to which front these were sent, nor there if they yet mock what women meant, who gave them flowers. Shall they return to beating of great bells in wild trainloads? A few. Too few for drums and yells, may creep back, silent, to village wells, up half-known roads.
I'd now like to welcome Harrogate International Partnerships representative for the twinning between Wellington and Harrogate, Kate Spencer, to deliver her address, along with a message from Mayor Andy Foster of Wellington.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Welcome. Today I stand before you as an English and New Zealand citizen. I am here, as we all are, to honour these young men from New Zealand and Australia. The ANZAC story began one day in 1915 when the combined Australian and New Zealand forces joined at dawn in their assault on the Turkish peninsula of Gallipoli in Turkey. That day was April the 25th and is now a day written into history for the ANZAC forces to remember the fallen of both world wars. At Gallipoli, Australians and New Zealanders fought side by side in a vicious struggle to reach high ground. Among them was schoolteacher turned soldier, Private Robert Steele from Auckland, and he wrote home, "Was I frightened? In one way I was, but it was more dazed. But as I watched the shells exploding about me, that dazed feeling gradually wore away. I fired 8 or 9 shots, and each Turk I fired at disappeared. I guess some of them got it. Others fired at me in return. A New Zealand colonel dropped alongside me, a bullet in his heart. You would just think, another gone, and then go forward. This Australian was bleeding badly. Oh mate, he said, come back and bandage my leg. I'm bleeding to death." The men who wrote home described life in a place they called hell. They wrote about their feelings as they went into battle, how it felt to be shot, and what it was like to drive a bayonet into a living man. One soldier summed it up. "You who are in New Zealand cannot read a list of wounded and killed without emotion. Can you then imagine our feelings as, overwrought and with strained nerves, we learned of the death of our comrades, for we are all comrades and brothers here." I will now say a few words from Wellington Mayor Andy Foster, who I had the pleasure of meeting on my recent trip to New Zealand. Today, we pause to remember those who lost their lives defending their country and community, our freedom and the way of life we cherish. We remember particularly the 4 airmen from Wellington, along with other New Zealanders buried at Stonefall Cemetery. Meeting Kate and seeing the work that she has done helps strengthen the sister relationship between Wellington and Harrogate. Remembering the fallen is as important today as it was during the World Wars. It's not about glorifying war, but remembering the actions of these brave men and women. This year, more than ever before, it is important to acknowledge the sacrifices of these people and what they've fought for, individual freedoms and rights for all. They fought against aggressive dictators who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. It is often difficult for our younger generations to grasp why we should remember and why it is important to show gratitude. But they have grown up in relative peace, free from the horrors of war. Europe has enjoyed relative peace for many years, but the events in Ukraine are a vivid example of why we must continue to remember and never forget. Daily updates of indiscriminate shelling of people, the widespread destruction of communities, and the disappearance and displacement of millions of people, including innocent children, remind us of how lucky we are in New Zealand and the United Kingdom. We have a strong bond as nations and as people built on history, values of freedom, democracy, and on personal links. I myself was born in Kent before moving to New Zealand as a child. It is that shared history and friendship that sees us work together in peacetime and has seen us serve together in times of conflict. The relationship between Harrogate and Wellington is important. I thank you for caring for these New Zealanders here in this cemetery. The ANZAC spirit is also one that binds us together. Slava Ukraini. And finally, I would like to thank Your Worship the Mayor and Lady Mayoress, our other esteemed guests and members of the public for attending the ceremony today. My special thanks go to 3 people. Firstly, an enormous thank you to Elizabeth Smith for her invaluable help and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for enabling Harrogate International Partnerships to host this inaugural ANZAC Day ceremony in Stonefall Cemetery, where they are so lovingly cared for. Secondly, my thanks go to the amazing Colin Gibbs, BEM, for his help in organising the equally amazing Tuwit Youth Band and the many cadets who are here today. And last, but not least, I'll do this. I give enormous thanks to Dennis Richards, OBE, Chair of Harrogate International Partnerships, for his unwavering belief and support in me, and never doubting for 1 minute my commitment and determination to make this ANZAC Day ceremony a reality for today and for the years to come. As our famous Kiwi, Sir Edmund Hillary, announced when he conquered Everest, it is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves.
I'd like to invite Lucy back to lead us in the 3 national anthems, and the words are all in the order of ceremony, so do feel free to join in. Lucy.
Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and
On behalf of Harrogate International Partnerships and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, thank you for attending this ANZAC ceremony and joining with us to remember these Australian and New Zealand servicemen who lie here together in Stonefall Cemetery and in many other resting places across the Commonwealth. I hope you have a safe journey home, but perhaps before going, you might like to find a memorial stone marked either by an Australian, a New Zealand flag. Either say the name quietly to yourself or out loud, so that we know that the Australians and New Zealanders who lie here are not forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ray, gun. Right, move to the left. Left. Turn. By the centre. Way. March.
Obelisk path. Inward. Turn. Obelisk path. By the left. Way. March.
Yes, it's lovely when the sun's out.
Very good.